What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 17 DFS MVP podcast. I'm your host, TJ Hernandez, the director of DFS at 4for4.com. Back as always with my co-hosts, John Daigle, Pat Kyren. Boys, welcome to the biggest, ugliest slate we've seen.
It is big and ugly.
It's not necessarily ugly, but pinning plays down is certainly an issue because there are values. There are every player we want to spend up for. So even poking holes in some of these spots, it's not really about that. It's about just getting it right, which I understand that's every tournament week. But genuinely for this one, it's really just about honing down the offenses and saying these are the players that are going to break out, and then cross your fingers because there's really no way to hone it down.
Yeah, I really like the like if we get a 9 to 10 game slate where they're kind of split between early and late, that's where my eye sees it the best. 13 games on the main slate this week with 10 of them early. So I'll be playing a lot of early only for sure. But before we get into it, Kyren, remind everybody what you got going on for playoff fantasy over at Legendary Upside.
Yeah, legendaryupside.com. We've got you covered with playoff best ball stuff. I have a podcast that I'll be releasing after we finish recording this. Talk to Will, one of the data scientists over at SaberSim, and he was talking through some of the correlation that we can think through with playoff best ball, where some of these guys are, we're trying to draft teams that are actually advancing. The NFL teams themselves are winning games and advancing through the rounds. So, this correlation help us think through how we're building teams, because can we benefit from some of that correlation to advance teams without having to take, random shots in the dark on the guy you need in round one. That's an interesting conversation. That's available for free on the Legendary Upside podcast. But also have this premium tool that we launched that is, I just think, a really nice kind of draft companion tool, kind of a second monitor type setup where it's dynamic rankings. So it'll actually shuffle the rankings based on who you've taken, just kind of help you keep track of like the bets you've already made essentially on which teams are going to advance. It's a much less frazzled drafting experience.
Yeah, it's a fun way to get some action, especially for those that have been playing season long all year and their seasons are winding down or have already ended. Obviously, with DFS, we go through Super Bowl with all the slates that are available. We will be touching on in some respect going through February. So if you just want to dabble in DFS and you haven't tried out the sub yet, sign up now. The DFS plan is only $24 through the rest of the season. You get an additional $25% off with the code YouTube. So make sure you check that out as soon as possible. But let's jump into this slate. And the reason I kind of said it's a little ugly, at least from a game perspective for GPPs, is we don't really have obvious shootout spots. The game with the highest totals also have very big spreads. Only a couple game with decent totals and relatively close spreads, starting with Ravens versus the Dolphins, 47-point total, a game in the early window with the Ravens favored by 3.5, giving them a total of 25.25. So, Pat, let's start on the Ravens side of this thing. Two good defenses here, so it looks like we're going to get relatively low ownership on both sides. On the Baltimore side, I mean, I think we're all pretty confident that their running backs just aren't going to get there in this offense. So if Lamar and company can get there in this spot, what are you looking for from him and his pass catchers, especially if Zay Flowers is out?
Yeah, I've been kind of intrigued by Odell Beckham recently. Just like his per route stuff is all so good, and it's just a question of how many routes is he going to run. And you'd have to think, like, with Zay Flowers, not healthy, right? Is he officially out?
I don't think he's officially out, but he was limited participant today.
Okay, so that's a reason where we should see Odell Beckham's playing time tick up. And when he's out there, they're really looking for him. You sometimes see this with guys, like they'll run not that many routes, and then their targets per route run will be super high because like they're coming on the field for stuff that's like kind of more for them, and so it doesn't translate fully to a bigger role. But I mean, Rashad Bateman's having trouble holding off Nelson Aguilar, so I think Beckham's kind of the guy. He's sort of the next guy up here. I think he'll he'll kind of soak up some of that. And if the idea is like Beckham's an older veteran coming off this injury, you don't really need to save him given the importance of this game to the Ravens. This has important seeding implications for them. So I think if we're going to see more of Beckham in the playoffs, I think we would also see more of Beckham here.
Yeah, and I think if you are going to play Lamar, especially if Zay Flowers is out, maybe we see Isaiah Likely's ownership get bumped up if Flowers is out. But right now, Isaiah Likely kind of in that second tier of ownership, so he should get some ownership, but not a lot. And obviously, Lamar, expensive quarterback, especially on DK, offsetting that with a lower salary player is nice, whether it be Odell or Likely. Daigle, on the Dolphins side, looks like we're going to have no Jalen Waddle this week. So obviously Tyreek's going to project very well. His high salary should keep his ownership in check a little bit. But obviously this is a very good Baltimore defense. So outside of Tyreek, is there anybody else that we can see even sporting a ceiling game against this Ravens D?
I honestly don't want to get there in this slate. I don't want to force this game at all, honestly, given how great both defenses have been. Again, people tried to poke holes in the Dolphins defense last week, citing the schedule, even though Vic Fangio has the pieces and has historically, when he's had the pieces, been able to deploy them successfully. And that seems to be what's happening from week eight on with Jalen Ramsey, even shutting down the Cowboys offense last week. So overall, not really interested in this game, honestly, but if you want to get there, I did a show with Rich Rebar of Sharp Football on Wednesday, and he was the first to cite that with Jalen Waddle off the field this year, Tyreek Hill has been targeted on 47% of his routes. Like Tyreek Hill has just been moved around the entire formation and hammered anyway. So with Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, and Kyren Williams as the main spend-up guys this week, I will be curious to see how their ownership fluctuates. Christian McCaffrey will probably be the highest rostered, and for all the right reasons. So I don't even necessarily want to fade him, but I will just continue throughout the week, see how these guys fare. But from the total perspective in this game environment overall, I think it's pretty bad for everyone, honestly. That's why my favorite play in this game is Gus Edwards on FanDuel, because if one team were to blow the other out, I think it's Edwards. Christian McCaffrey is the only running back with more carries from a 2-score game script this entire year than Edwards. And even if you were to then put the filters on behind the scenes and only minimize that to when Keaton Mitchell entered the rotation in week 6, Gus Edwards is still second in the league in carries from 8 points plus. So I think Gus Edwards is my favorite way to play this one, honestly.
Yeah, it's always tough with these expensive stacks, quarterback wide receiver stacks, on especially on DraftKings. When the slate is expanded out to 13 games, it's even more so because you have to be so perfect against so many other players going. And if you're playing Tua, as Daigle mentioned, like Tyreek, it's you have to stack them with Tyreek with Waddle out. So you're just giving up so much to get there. So if you are looking at the expensive quarterbacks in this game, at least Lamar gives us some salary relief in his pairing options. But yeah, either whether it's Tyreek alone, Gus alone. I think given the defenses in this game, I probably want one-off plays and hope they just go completely off, then hope that this game gets here. And that's reflected in the value scores on 4 for 4 this week. Lamar's always going to project well, but I don't think we need to be using him in cash. So the only player that really is projecting as a cash game play is Baltimore DST, because they are pretty affordable. Another game, and again, for this slate, it's a decent total. As I mentioned, the high total games are really big spreads. This one's okay in terms of the point total, 44-point total. Texans are favored by 4 against the Titans. Probably going to be tough to find true ceiling plays here, but the thing that the Texans have going for them, Daigle, is CJ Stroud is set to return. The issue, as I just mentioned, these expensive stacks, if you're playing him, probably like him and Nico are probably too expensive for us to like. So if we are playing Stroud, do you like him with Noah Brown or Schultz, or maybe we just look for like Devin Singletary as a salary pivot off of a chalky Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
And we saw the last game that Tank Dell was injured early in. Nico Collins recorded a 46% target share from CJ Stroud. It's an amazing spot, and I don't think Nico's salary is going to get out of hand given what everyone's trying to do in this slate. So because of that, Nico's definitely, I want to say arguably a priority for me, but I'm thinking of everyone in his range I want to play between Chris Olave in that same territory as well. So I'll just say Nico's definitely in my pool of players. The only thing that may take me off of him is that I do think the players being rushed back from concussion is a serious thing. Whether it's been wide receiver, even quarterbacks this year, Brock Purdy, Trevor Lawrence, both struggled when they came back from their concussion too. And given how serious this one was for Stroud and that he missed 2 games, they're in the playoff hunt, so they need him back. I do question if he's even healthy, honestly. Sure. So it takes a little bit of leap of faith. I think we're going to get Nico at 2%. Again, given that everyone else is paying for players above him, but he should be in your pool because it's an amazing spot.
Yeah, the expensive wide receivers are in good spots. At a similar salary, Rashee Rice and Chris Olave are probably going to get a lot of the ownership in that salary range. So on DK at 72, I do think we end up with Nico Collins kind of in that no man's land. And I don't think I think if people are playing this spot, it's probably the Singletary side. And then even there, I don't think there's going to be a ton of ownership on him. But if you can get leverage or a salary pivot off of those 2 chalky guys, Russ and Olave, Nico, even if you don't like Stroud, I think is a standalone play. If he commands that huge target share, could obviously pay off on his own. Kyren on the Titan side, looks like we're going to be getting Will Levis returning, but even more so than the Texans side, I think this is a really tough spot to find ceiling plays. Henry as an underdog, I don't think we're going to like him there. We have at 4 Nuke and Chigakonkwo both projecting as decent values, but nothing really jumping off the page here for me.
I feel the same way. I think this game, it certainly could be fun because the Texans aren't, you can pass on the Texans and they're tough to run against. The Titans are also tough to run against. You can run on them. They're not as good as they were last year against the run, but they're much better against the run than the pass. So you could see this game kind of being like sneaky fun. But I think I prefer that from the Stroud side where, you're, to Daigle's point, we need to take the leap of faith that he's healthy and playing really good football again. That's how this game gets fun. The Titans certainly aren't going to like push it into fun territory on their own. That's not their style. So it really comes down to, are the Texans moving the ball through the air effectively, and are they being aggressive? And if so, then yeah, I think like Chigakonkwo, he's in the mix, 3,600. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Hopkins has such a big target share. I think he's viable, but they don't like jump off the page to me.
Yeah, early projections, we got a pretty decent ownership projection on Gerald Everett. So I mean, if you could salary pivot from Everett to Chig at half the ownership, I mean, are you really going to be that upset if you're fading Easton Stick's primary pass catcher tight end chalk? Like, I don't think that's too bad of a deal. But with all that said, cash game, not a lot of interest here on either side. Nuke, as I mentioned, projecting decently, but nothing that we need to be forcing into this game. Moving on, Chiefs Bengals, another game with a 44-point total, but the Chiefs are favored by 6.5. So not expecting a ton out of the Bengals side. Chiefs 25.25 total is a little intriguing, and we have some late swappability with this game kicking off in the 4:25 window. We're going to get chalk on CEH and probably on Rashee Rice as well. So, Kyren, is this a spot actually where, with the ownership on these 2 guys, like where Mahomes finally has a ceiling, whether it be with Rashee Rice or maybe even finally with Travis Kelce against a Bengals defense that can definitely be scored on?
Yeah, so I just wrote about this in the walkthrough. I say just because I haven't published the walkthrough yet. I'm going to get that out later this evening. But the my feeling was that yes, I think that this is a pretty good setup for the Chiefs, and I know the Chiefs have been frustrating this year, and now Mahomes is like a system quarterback apparently, and it took like 4 mediocre games for everyone to turn on him. But yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of betting on the larger sample of Mahomes being amazing, and you're betting on a matchup that's quite good, and I think quite good for the Chiefs specifically, like where the Bengals have been especially bad at preventing efficiency against first reads. And so one of my reads on the Chiefs is that like it's just been kind of obvious what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the ball to Travis Kelce, and they haven't really had a counterpunch beyond that. Well, Rashee Rice emerging helps there, but I think it also helps to go against this defense that's 31st in dropback success rate. They're allowing explosive plays at the third highest rate, and they're also third worst against first reads. So it's a pretty nice matchup for Mahomes and company. I know it's going to kind of take a leap of faith to do the Mahomes Kelce stack at this point, but I definitely think it's in play.
Yeah, I think I think given that CH and Rashee Rice are both probably looking at over 20% ownership, I think you're getting the leverage, you're getting the ceiling against this defense. Obviously, you can still double Mahomes if you want, but do you have a lean on? I don't think any of us would want to play CH and Rashee Rice together at 20% on which of those chalky Chiefs you would rather have in your lineup.
I mean, I lean Rice just because it's like a talent thing.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I get the salary saving angle with CH. So I think he's fine.
Are we suggesting because of Rice's price, then not many people are going to play Kelce?
I mean, I think Kelce will just get I think he might get some moderate ownership, but I mean, I don't know how anyone I don't know how a 7K Kelce gets above, what do we have, Matt? 8.5%. I don't see how he gets above 15%. Like maybe we're low there. Like maybe it comes in at 10 or 11, but I just don't see how he gets to 15 or higher.
It is interesting though, because like Rice versus Kelce straight up as a flex. Like, wouldn't you rather just have Kelce and it's only 100 more?
Yeah, but 100 more at tight end. 7K at tight end is always tough to pull off.
It's also annoying that CEH is in this spot because he's been terrible, but also the Bengals let every terrible running back they face do whatever they want. And CEH, assuming he plays, is going to get every touch. Ill on Friday, and Pacheco also questionable. So we don't know, but we also know if one or the other gets ruled out and the other's active, they're most likely going to handle every single touch over Michael P. Ryan and generic Prince.
Yeah, there's still quite a bit to be determined in this game with injury reports. And some of that is on the Chiefs defense as well. Still get a chance that L'Jarius Sneed is out, which could have a big impact on if we want to play any Bengals contrarian plays. Even if Jamar Chase is active, nobody's going to be playing the Bengals side of this thing, Daigle. But I think if he's out and L'Jarius Sneed is out, I think that sets up a pretty interesting leverage play with T. Higgins, not having to deal with L'Jarius Sneed. Do you see any leverage plays on the Bengals side here?
Sure. T. Higgins is the one that stands out. I do think, although it's too cute, I think people, since it's a slate we need salary in, may get to Andre Yoshivas because he did match T. Higgins with a 19% target share last week. And I think it's fine for cash games. Again, we just play the values in cash and be done with it. In tournaments, though, I do think it's pretty thin. Whereas T. Higgins, we talked about it last week. Before that game, 6 career games without Jamar Chase, was averaging 90 receiving yards, 24.6% target share. And then last week just blew up with 130 and a touchdown. So Higgins would be the one for me that actually has the ceiling.
Yeah. And again, whether you're playing that as a mini with the chalk on the Chiefs side, or, you know, if you're playing it, I don't know how easy it would be to fit him in with Kelce and Mahomes, but you're getting 3 very low owned plays or relatively low owned plays in this spot with CH and Rashee Rice. And we all know
I don't feel the need to bring anyone back either.
Sure.
I'm a little bit worried that Patrick Mahomes will get steamed because it's not like people hate Mahomes. They still want to play him. And
That's
now
true.
it's suddenly the best spot possible. And everyone wants to play Rashee Rice and Kelce. Everyone knows CEH is a chalk play, so they're trying to find leverage off of him. So I am worried this game overall gets steamed a bit. And then I just get to be the one to say, well, the Chiefs aren't good, so I don't care. I just play everyone else instead. Yeah,
if we get Mahomes up at 13 or 14%, and Kelce gets up to 14%, then we're not really loving that spot.
It's all like last week where Tanner Hudson on a 2-game slate last week with Irv Smith healthy scratch, probably because no one was paying attention. I get it. It's Christmas weekend. We're all doing other things, but he closed at 24% in that 2-game slate, and I got 1 catch out of him. I was so pissed. I do not understand how that happened. Also, we saw that Mahomes last week and just that offense in general, it was against a Raiders defense that is literally the number 1 defense in fantasy since Antonio Pierce took over in their last 7 games. But goodness gracious, man, they're just so useless. They have no one out there. So yeah, I'm just a little bit worried about that environment altogether.
Can Antonio Pierce win Coach of the Year? Is he eligible for that award? That would be fun.
I think the Raiders have like a 20-25% chance of still sneaking to the playoffs.
Yep.
So if they were to, then I think he could, because that's the award. That's the only award, I should say, that makes sense every year. MVP is basically the quarterback who has the most wins. Comeback player of the year is basically just a bad player who was discovered mid-year. Alex Smith averaged 5.5 yards per attempt, but he came back from the gnarliest injury we ever saw.
What about this as an olive branch? What if Purdy wins comeback player of the year? Is that good? Can that bring the community back together?
I think that's too thin because we're still in the division, the conference championship. So that's only 1 game removed.
I tried.
Can't do that. But for Coach of the Year, to answer your question, it's interesting because this year, although Dan Cable was the favorite for last night, there are a lot of coaches, not just Stefanski, who are making the most out of the least. And that's who has historically won. Brian Daboll last year made the most out of the least, snuck that awful Giants team into the playoffs, only to get road graded after the Vikings win. 2 years ago, Mike Vrabel took that awful Titans team to the wild card round. And also that was the year Rich Bisaccia got 3rd place in the voting over Zach Taylor, who took the Bengals to the Super Bowl, because everyone knows Coach of the Year is what do you actually do as a coach. So to me, it is still DeMeco Ryans, Shane Steichen, and Stefanski. But if the Raiders were to sneak in, sure, sign Pierce up.
Well, speaking of
DFS.
bad awards and bad award, bad
Really
award takes,
moving
on to the 49ers at the Commanders, moving on to these games where we have, again, the high totals, but also huge spreads, so very unlikely shootouts. Daigle, let's start with the 49ers side, who are favored by almost 2 touchdowns with a point total close to 32. I mean, at this point, it's the same question every week. How heavy are we going on CMC chalk? And this is the best matchup he'll have all season. And are we stacking Purdy? And if so, who are we stacking him with and how heavily?
I believe Brad Moore in the chat earlier asked, who is your favorite spend-up player to prioritize? And it's got to be McCaffrey. Since Washington traded Chase Young and Montez Sweat, no running back has scored less than 22.3 PPR points against him. And that was Tony Pollard, who doesn't get there against anyone. And he still got there as an RB1 against Washington. So to me, it's a nuclear McCaffrey game. The thing is, I know it's expensive on FanDuel, but you can also still bring along Brock Purdy. They can both get there.
Yeah.
So I don't even feel like I need a stacking partner. On DraftKings, it's a lot easier. You can go down to George Kittle, who's 1,400 less than Travis Kelce. But even on FanDuel, with both of them so expensive, just Purdy, McCaffrey, those are your spend-up options, because Purdy should be a top 2 quarterback in this slate. He's much better than, let's say Lamar, who's a cash game option. This is the nuclear game. He's leading the league in yards per attempt from a clean pocket still, 10.5 yards per attempt. And as we know, the Commanders are the only defense generating pressure on less than 30% of teams' dropbacks since they traded those 2 studs. So it's the 49ers onslaught, man. They're going to get there. It's impossible for them not to get there.
Yeah, if we look at the running back projections, we have on DraftKings, I think CMC's median projection is 40% higher than any other running back this week. It's really, really hard spot to get away from CMC. And for those wondering about fitting those expensive players in, at least on DraftKings, kind of the cash game lineup is jam Hurts, jam CMC, and then punt your pass catchers. So with Zamir White, with CEH available, I think we're going to see quite a few studs and duds builds. So keep that in mind when you have CMC in, even with Purdy, you're still going to want to get pretty unique around there, because even Purdy at 7K, CMC at 93 on DK or 96. you could still fall into a lot of similar lineups as other people. So just be very cognizant of those cheap players that you are using, because they could end up being relatively high owned. Kyren, it looked like we maybe had a chance to get, some kind of pushback from the Commanders with what we've seen from Jacoby Brissett the last couple of weeks, but he lands on the injury report late yesterday with a hamstring. So now he's questionable. I mean, from what we've seen, I would assume we want Jacoby to play if we're targeting this game. If he does, is there anybody that offers anything from a GPP perspective on the Commander side?
Yeah, I think we strongly want Jacoby Brissett to play in this game. Like, I think if we're targeting this game, he makes a big, big difference. I mean, we've seen Howell just completely turtle over the last couple weeks, and he got benched like twice in a row, and he was really bad the game before that. So, the issue here for the 49ers is like, are they going to keep their foot on the gas long enough to get there with like the onslaughts, which I think are pretty interesting here. And maybe they would, because they got embarrassed by the Ravens, and it's kind of like their pride's on the line. But this is a Super Bowl team. Like, they also could just easily dispatch with the Commanders and pack it up. Brissett, I think, has just such a better chance of hanging with them than Howell does. He also is 4,900, so he's pretty interesting just to play.
Yeah.
It makes me just more interested in the game, where I can go like McCaffrey and a 49er, and then I have Brissett as my quarterback. I think you could do that with like Curtis Samuel. You could do that with Terry McLaurin. You could do that with I probably would just single him and bring back 2 49ers or something like that. Or like, he is also 4,900, so yeah. I don't know. Maybe you don't even need to stack him.
Yeah, I have a little more loaded Brissett question for both you guys. I'll save it till we get through these next couple of games. But if Brissett is active, I do think the 49ers onslaughts are much more in play. All of them, not surprisingly, projecting very well. Purdy, cash game considerations, CMC cash game lock, even at his salary. And all 3 main 49ers pass catchers are projecting as very good value. So if you could fit any of them in and want to, you could definitely play multiple 49ers in cash this week. Another team with a big spread, the only other team with a total of at least 30 points this week, is the Eagles, favored by 12 against the Cardinals. Game total 48 points, but of course, as big underdogs, Cardinals only have an 18-point team total. Kyren, let's start on the Eagles side, because there are a lot of high salary quarterbacks that are very much in play this week. The problem with Hurts is he's the high salary quarterback with the highest ownership. So is he that much better a play than Allen, Lamar, Mahomes, even Purdy, given his ownership, or is it, can we offset it with maybe his lower owned pass catchers and be okay?
Yeah, I think the thing I struggle with Hurts is like, how much is he going to bring along the other pieces in this matchup? Yeah. I wrote up Justin Fields. He was the cover boy of the walkthrough last week, because I just love the matchup for him, because it's like, man, Fields can, like, he can attack downfield here and he can use his legs, but it's sort of like, hey, Justin Fields isn't someone you're always excited about. You should be excited about him here. Hurts is someone we're like always excited about. And if anything, this matchup, I feel like, kind of dampens my enthusiasm a little, because they're not going to push back particularly well. Mm-hmm. And Hurts, I think, will get there. Like, I think Hurts will have a really good game, but who do you bring along with him? And is he making AJ Brown a good play at a high salary just because he has a big game? Maybe not, because like this, he could push in 2 touchdowns pretty easily here, but that doesn't help Brown. It's also a week where you've got some of the pocket passers, especially Purdy, set up really well. And you also have Brissett and Tyrod Taylor available as like really cheap, kind of mobile-ish quarterback options that, if you're just trying to get quarterback right, you can do that a lot cheaper. So I don't think the Hurts chalk doesn't really appeal to me that much, because it doesn't, like, I think Hurts is very well positioned, but I'm probably only getting like one thing right when I put Hurts in my lineup.
Yeah, he is the cash game quarterback, but I think I agree with you that it's pretty hard to figure out how you want to use him and probably a relatively expensive pass catcher in GPPs. Daigle, on the Cardinals side, Kyler Murray back-to-back DNPs before limited practice on Friday, but even at full strength, hasn't looked that great. Philly, if we look at season-long numbers, profiles as a pass funnel defense, but they have been struggling against running backs of late. Is James Conner a crazy contrarian player? Can we at least think about it a little bit here?
He's a really good play. He's been an RB1 now in 3 consecutive games. As you mentioned, over the last month, the Eagles have struggled against the runs mightily. It's not only that they're allowing big plays because they've actually played the most defensive backs in the entire league because they've been dealing with so many injuries, but now on the ground too. A couple weeks ago, Ken Walker reached 86 and a touchdown. Saquon Barkley last week reached 80 and a touchdown. So I think James Conner is very viable. Conner and Trey McBride really are my options here, given that McBride has run 68% of his routes from the slot, and that's where the Eagles are allowing the most receiving yards per game. So those are my 2 options for Hurts and A.J. Brown. Not even A.J. Brown, for Hurts even. It really just comes down to how much do I lose around him if I play him, which is why I still think it's a slate where outside of Purdy and Matthew Stafford, I still think spinning down for quarterback is kind of the best way to go in tournaments.
Yeah, it's going to be I can't wait to see who you guys like out of these cheap guys, because that's what I want to ask. But before we get to those cheap guys, one more expensive quarterback team that's favored by quite a bit. Bills favored by 14 against the Patriots with a team total of 27. The game total is only 40. But Daigle, we do have some like mid-range chalk, maybe not like in the 25%, but Zeke probably gets played a bit. Demario Douglas probably gets played a bit, while none of the Bills are going to get played much in a game where the Bills are home favorites. And I mean, Josh Allen can go nuclear. He's the one quarterback, well, I guess Lamar, but he's the quarterback we've seen go nuclear without necessarily having to bring all of his players along. So, I mean, Josh with the cheap option, even like a naked Josh Allen here. Any thoughts on the Bills?
I don't want to talk anyone off of Josh Allen, but again, it just comes down to how much you lose if you play him, especially because typically we could spin down for James Cook, Gabe Davis in the past with him, but it's predictably not a good matchup for Gabe Davis, since the Patriots are one of only 2 defenses running man coverage on 40% of their defensive snaps, along with the Cowboys. And that's the exact coverage that Gabe Davis has struggled immensely against, not only this year, but for his entire career. Not to mention that James Cook now, we have to deal with Leonard Fournette poaching touches away too. That was a 1-score game script on Saturday throughout, and Leonard Fournette still got 5 carries. So it's enough to take away touches from Cook overall. So Josh Allen, sure. Stephon Diggs, although we haven't seen his ceiling in 2 months, I do think it's a tremendous game. He actually led every receiver in the league last week in target share, although he didn't get there in the box score. So if you can fit him in, Diggs, Allen, of course, they're fine. You don't even need a run back from the Patriots. Everyone's trying to play Demario Douglas, even though he's like this little possession receiver who doesn't have a ceiling at all. Yeah. But again, it's really expensive, and it's just hard to get to the other guys without them.
Yeah, of those like 4 or 5 most expensive quarterbacks, Josh Allen should come in comfortably as the least rostered.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, we don't need to be like super contrarian with our quarterbacks. The pieces around them can offset that, but it's definitely worth noting that he'll probably be in that like 4% range, while the other guys would probably be quite a bit above that. Kyren, I think the interesting here is a couple weeks ago, we were pretty comfortable saying Zeke was bad chalk. Now with Bailey Zappi, he's been targeting Zeke a ton. I mean, are we to the point where like Zeke's not going to be 25%, but is he an okay GPP play even at like 18 or 19%?
I mean, I don't know. I'm worried he comes in above that, I guess would be my concern. And then I don't want to. I mean, he's getting there, yeah, but it's like it's pretty gross. He's got a decent success rate this year, so he's kind of like chugging along, hitting the right holes, that kind of thing. But he's got no burst, and so you're just kind of hoping he gets peppered with underneath targets. And yeah, I don't know. I think if he stays tame, I think it's fine. But he's just one of those pieces where I would be terrified that I flip it over and he's like 25.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm kind of on the other side. I could see him being the guy that gets squeezed. CH down at 53 and Zamir at 51. Like, I think his ownership projection might be a little high. Like, do people want to pay 900 more or 700 more for Zeke compared to those 2 guys?
Well, CH is also gross, but
CH is gross.
Yeah. I'm not Zamir. I mean, if Zamir's, is there some chance of Jacob still playing, or is he out now?
He still hasn't practiced. He's closer to doubtful than questionable.
Okay. Yeah, I think people go to Zamir over Zeke for sure.
Yeah, we don't love the spot for sure. There's enough pass catchers that are cheap where like you could probably get away with like fading a lot of the cheap running backs. I think Singletary might be my favorite cheap guy, to be honest.
I kind of like the Singletary goal.
Singletary is an amazing pivot this week above all else.
Yeah.
His snaps are way down, but it's like garbage time stuff.
Yeah,
don't
get me started
didn't get any run.
Don't get me started on snaps don't matter. We don't need to do this. It's all touches. Don't follow snaps, follow touch counts.
I think snaps are an important piece of context, but they use context with their context, and the context was they were playing Dare Gumbawale, which they're only going to do if they get blown out again.
And the Titans offense is not scaring anyone away.
Right.
This is the portion of the show where we usually touch on the other games, and there's quite a bit of them. There's still 7 other games to touch on. Rams are really the only other team with like a decent team total. All of the other game totals are relatively low, but I think what's interesting this week is that we have 7 quarterbacks at 5K or lower, and a few of them are projecting half decently. So Daigle, I'll start with you. Of these cheap quarterback plays, and we could talk about the team or just the quarterback play straight up. Is there a cheap quarterback player team that stands out to you?
What's crazy is that all of them are in good spots. That's the issue. Tyrod Taylor, every time he's come off the bench, Taylor, it's all relative, but he's been the best Giants quarterback. He's the only one who fearlessly launches the ball through the air. He showed that last week, coming off the bench for over 100 yards as a gunslinger, over 8 yards per attempt. It gets Darius Slayton involved also as a cheap option too, in a game where we think the Giants will be a negative game script against, honestly, the top 2 offense in the league with Kyren, Puka, and Cooper Kupp all healthy. So yeah, like the Giants can definitely answer with cheap Tyrod Taylor. Jared Stidham, that performance against the Niners last year lives rent-free in my head. It was literally one of the best performances by any quarterback over the last 5 years. It was incredible. He took them to overtime. And now it's this Chargers defense that they lost by 2 points, but the Bills averaged 6.5 yards per play. Josh Allen went over 11 yards per attempt. Like the Chargers didn't stop them. They just got lucky the Bills didn't score more points. So Stidham from Marvin Mims, their best receiver, also is an amazing little cheap stack to have with Gerald Everett to fit everything else in. And then, Jacoby Brissett, as we talked about earlier, also he's come off the bench for 5 possessions the last 2 weeks. They've scored a touchdown in all 5 drives. So again, they're actually all in great spots with cheap run backs and stacks as well. That's the issue.
Stidham's projecting as our best cheap value on both sites. You already have Cortland Sutton rolled out. Jerry Jeudy was DNP with an illness. We don't want to play Jerry Jeudy anyway, right? No, so you have a narrow, not even narrow. You know exactly who you're playing Stidham with if you play him.
But didn't Mims this time too? Wasn't he?
Mims is questionable, but I think he's going to play.
Okay.
And either way, you can just use Brandon Johnson. He was right there with Mims anyhow. We just all want to play Mims because he provides that ceiling. That's the one, though, I think I lose in the shuffle of all these quarterbacks, if only because Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer aren't playing. Thus, like, where do we even get a ceiling from the Chargers in this game? Like, who the hell is going to score points?
Quentin Johnson, man.
I tried it once. I got a touchdown on a 7% target share. I assure you, it was not pretty.
Quentin Johnson pivot off of Gerald Everett chalk. Let's go. Kyren, is there a cheap quarterback or cheap game stacks that are standing out to you? Because as I mentioned, we have a ton of them.
Yeah, I mean the other 2, I think Brissett and Tyrod Taylor are the 2 that I was really eyeing up. I think Brissett, if he's healthy, it's a great spot because like you have the incentives aligned here where like Brissett didn't get to play all year and he pretty clearly should have gotten to play some. So he's out there trying to make stuff happen for his next contract. You got Bieniemy trying to show, actually, I'm a pretty good OC. Howell's the one who's not good. You got Ron Rivera, who's definitely going to get fired, but trying to be like, maybe not fire me. So there's like the team will be trying to, be aggressive, and they already are super aggressive through the air. And they're playing a 49ers defense that's a massive pass funnel because teams know they have to keep up with them and play aggressively and try to score points. And the Commanders will hold up their end there through the play calling. So if he's healthy, he's my favorite, partly because I want to bet on that game environment from the 49ers side, and he's a way to get into it cheaply at quarterback. CMC plus, I think, a 49ers piece plus Brissett is very fun. I also do like Tyrod Taylor, though. I think the Slayton element's interesting. I also like Kyren Williams a lot here. I think the Rams wide receivers is a little bit harder to, well, I guess it's hard to pick your 49er receiver too, but they're set up well. Like the Giants don't, they blitz, but I'm not worried about them just getting to Stafford with the pass rush, and protection has been kind of the key thing with them for much of the year. So I think Stafford's set up fairly well here, and Kyron's set up really well. So Tyrod Taylor with Rams coming back is also really interesting to me.
Yeah, we have a couple cheap receivers popping in those games as well. Curtis Samuel and Wan'Dale Robinson, especially on DraftKings, are popping as pretty decent value. So there is some indicators that those passing offenses could have some juice this week. The only other cheap player in a passing game that is popping quite a bit is Rashee Rice against that Tampa Bay pass funnel. Could get a chalky Olave and some ownership on Shaheed. So anything from either side of that game for you guys?
I think Bucks and Saints is great because Derek Carr's been awesome against the blitz this year, honestly. And finally, these last 2 weeks, he's given us a ceiling. He's been a top 9 quarterback in both of these last 2 games, albeit in garbage time, but no Marshawn Lattimore. So even Mike Evans could get there, since historically he's been drowned in this matchup in man-to-man coverage. Both the Saints and Bucs secondaries have fallen apart completely over the last couple of months now. So I think there are going to be a lot of points in this one. Olave has a 26% target share against the blitz from Carr as well. He's going to get lost in the shuffle along with Nico Collins just because everyone's trying to go up further. So yeah, those are 2 of my favorite plays. And if you want to get up Olave because you need to spend money, we've seen Shaheed spike double-digit target shares now in back-to-back games because the Saints get blown out. So sure, you can also play Shaheed in this game.
I think it's a little fragile because the Bucs have been very conservative, even with Baker Mayfield playing well over the last few weeks. And so I'm just worried about do they push the Saints enough? And the Saints are kind of a balanced to run first team. So it's something kind of needs to spark here. But I do agree, if it gets going, it could be fun.
Yeah, I think the only other spot that I'm interested in is if and when Josh Jacobs is ruled out, if Zamir White gets out of control as the cheap running back option, if by Sunday morning he's at 25%, I think looking at the Colts side is pretty interesting.
Without Zach Moss, Jonathan Taylor is definitely interesting, away from Kyren Williams and maybe trying to figure it out from there. My only concern is that it is a good matchup for Zamir White because the Colts we've now seen the shine has come off of Shane Steichen and just trying to piece together everything because they've had so many injuries. This Colts team has been terrible the last few games, and I think it's because the magic has just run out now.
Yeah. No matter how you're building this week, it just definitely keep in mind that with so many cheap both quarterback and pass catching options available and 13 games on the slate, go playing heavy game stacks on the full slate. It's going to be really tricky, except in the smallest field stuff, to really separate with game stacks. It's setting up where you kind of have to be. It's like a nine player parlay kind of week.
I want to prioritize the 49ers and the Rams. I know that. Yeah. I'm just not sure yet how to do it.
Yeah, I agreed on the 49ers. I mean, absolute smash spot. How do you get unique there? I mean, if whatever player we feel like is going to come in low owned, that's probably who you want to be doubling Purdy with. Before we get to our favorite plays of the week, I want to remind everybody about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Go to prizepicks.com/DFSMVP. Use the code DFSMVP for our first deposit match up to $100. And once again, we have a 3-player pick'em where you can 5x your money. Starting with the Saturday game this week, Jared Goff projection of 263.5 pass yards against a Dallas defense that gets pressure. Also a Dallas defense that you could beat on the ground. Detroit set up as good as any offense to take advantage of that matchup on the ground, liking Jared Goff for less than 263 63.5 passing yards. We already talked about Rashid Shaheed in that matchup against the Tampa Bay pass funnel defense, projecting for 32.5 yards. We like him for more than 32.5 yards with his increased target share and the fact that he's a player that could get there on one play. And at the top of the show, we talked about that good defensive matchup, Miami versus Baltimore. Cedric Wilson getting a little bit of an inflated projection with Jalen Waddle out. Against Baltimore, we like him for less than 35.5 receiving yards. Again, 5 extra money with that 3-player pick'em. Don't forget to go to prizepicks.com/DFS MVP and use the code DFS MVP for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Kyren, let's start with you and your favorite quarterback play of the slate.
So I put down Taylor. Talked about I like that spot a lot. I would be Brissett. I think Brissett's more fun.
Yeah.
I feel better about kind of his ceiling because of the pass volume that could really be behind him. I think the overall game environment of them just like needing to pass, them being aggressive right out of the gate, it's all there for Brissett. But if I don't want to, say this is my guy, and then he doesn't play. So
yeah,
it would be Brissett, but I like Taylor a lot too.
Yeah, if you want to be playing the cheap guys, like no one's projecting that high. So like if I was looking at ownership projections, I don't think I'd be splitting hairs too much on the cheap guys if I'm worried about like a 7% quarterback versus a 4% quarterback. They open so much salary and most of their stacking partners aren't going to be too highly owned as anyway. So I just, if you like one, I think opening up the salary is quite important. If you want to play it that way.
I actually prefer Tyrod over Brissett, if only because in the games that Taylor played a majority of the snaps, he averaged 6 carries. So we're getting the rushing floor to get there too.
All right. Well, if Mims is active, I'm going to say Mims is my favorite just so I could play him because we've been wanting to play him all year and it's fun. Daigle, who's your favorite quarterback play?
I talked about Brock Purdy, and I just think he gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, especially on FanDuel, where he's the third price quarterback. Jalen Hurts is going to be the cash game option. I get that. But because of it, Purdy's going to be 5% or less rostered. And again, you can just tack him on to Christian McCaffrey. You don't even need a third option, although I like George Kittle, bring him along, but you don't need a third option. You can just play Purdy with McCaffrey and go from there to soak up all the touchdowns.
Yeah. And in cash game, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to get up to Hurts. He has the highest floor pretty much every week. Obviously with a 30-point total, has a ceiling against that defense. So I'm trying to get up to Hurts in cash, and it should be relatively easy with the cheap running backs and pass catchers available this week. Speaking of the cheap running backs, Dago, who's your favorite running back this week?
We talked about him, but yes, Zamir White is in an incredible spot. Even the Colts, these last, or out of their bye, I should say, dusted for 29 PPR points by backfields collectively. Even Rashad White and Derrick Henry, who never go over 100 yards, got there. Last week, Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson both averaged over 6 yards per carry. So with 20 touches in back-to-back games in place of Josh Jacobs, it's even objectively an amazing spot for Zamir.
Yeah, just let's keep an eye on that ownership because we have him still projected pretty high. I think we have him in this 15
if
to
I play him
range, but
I don't think I play CEH. I think I'm going to take a stand one or the other way.
Yeah, I don't think I would play two of the cheap guys together. If I want to play two cheap guys, I think I want to throw
especially because
next with them.
McCaffrey is going to garner similar ownership, and so you just can't play all three in tournaments. There's no way.
Yeah, Crane, I think because so many people want to play McCaffrey, I think your guy, I don't think he'll go unowned, but I think he might be in an awkward salary spot that could kind of help you flip the build this week.
Yeah, Kyren Williams, I think, is a really interesting play. McCaffrey, obviously, is just in such a good spot. He's going to be the cover boy of the walkthrough, mostly just to celebrate the amazing year that he's had. But and because I think he'll also smash this week. But it's like one of those things where at his salary, you're really hoping for, like, can he put up 40, And not that Kyren is also pretty expensive, but if the field is going to be making that bet that McCaffrey goes nuts, I mean, I think there's ways of that failing, Brissett not being fully healthy. Like if they have to go to Howell and he just kind of craters and they can go home early, like McCaffrey's not going to have the game you need. I think that the balance might be a little bit better here with the Rams and the Giants where, maybe the Rams are, able to kind of they're not running away with this game in the way that I think we can pretty easily envision the 49ers running away with it. And we also know that when they get in close, they're looking for Kyren. He's been their touchdown maker, and he's just really good in general. So, I just think this is a really strong spot for the Rams offense to move the ball, bet on the goal line roll, and pivot you off of McCaffrey, which is scary as hell, but he's gonna be chalky.
We're gonna be sweating some kind of fear. It's just a matter of like who you feel. Who you feel doesn't allow you to lose years of your life when watching them explode.
Yeah. Hopefully we're just not, it's one of those weeks where we're not dead 20 minutes into the slate. That's all. That's what we're hoping for.
I'm so worried. I would be so worried about a McCaffrey fade.
When McCaffrey puts up like the 40 bird, it feels like he's going to put up 60. Like you just everything. It's like he's just like skiing downhill, and he's just like, it's crazy. So, maybe don't. Some of you don't have.
For cash games, it's McCaffrey for me this week. We don't care about salary. It's just one of those weeks where McCaffrey, he projects so much higher than the field. Start with him. Start with one of the high floor quarterbacks. Just figure it out from there. There's plenty of value at running back, at the pass catchers, where we don't need to be worried about trying to fit in the AJ Browns of the world in cash games this week. Mm-hmm. Wide receiver, you guys both have two very interesting picks that we haven't touched on at all this week. So I'm excited to hear, Crane, what you have to say about your guy first.
Yeah, George Pickens. I just think when I'm looking around and kind of the salary, this week doesn't offer like a ton of guys in that mid-5 range that you're all that interested in. I mean, Tyler Lockett's there at 5,700 on DraftKings. I think he'd be interesting if DK Metcalf was out for sure, but it seems like Metcalf's going to play and probably be fine. Pickens, I mean, just had this blow-up game. That's nice to see. We got Mason Rudolph injecting a little bit of life into this.
Speaking of your slate being dead 10 minutes into the slate.
Boy, you aren't kidding. I just turned off the TV. I was like, this doesn't matter anymore. I can't save a 2-game slate.
I mean, but the other thing is like, okay, like how did Pickens get there over the middle of the field? That was nice. Yep. Not just sideline.
He got there because the Bengals can't tackle is how he got there. Are they going to show up this game?
I mean, he's playing Seahawks. Seahawks aren't that great.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it is tough because Pickens does not have a target lead over Deontay Johnson. His targets per out run, only 19%. Johnson's at 24%. I do think they kind of cannibalize each other. But this is a second-year wide receiver. He's got 2.05 yards per route run. He's 5,300. He's in a good matchup. His quarterback is shown a little bit more life than the quarterback play he's had all season, and he's explosive. And it does feel like TJ was saying, like we need to probably be being perfect here a little bit. And so it's like, a well-priced, explosive wide receiver in a good matchup. I wouldn't be doing anything else in this game. I'm not even trying to like mini or anything like that. I would just play a one-off Pickens. But it feels like the slate where you could do that.
Yeah, it feels like slate where you have to do that. Like you're probably going to need like 2 or 3 random one-offs on a slate like this.
Story of all these backups have like been the same outside of Joe Flacco. They come in for 2 games, they ignite the offense, but then the rest of the league realizes they're backups. They have the tape then, and backups can't adjust in real time to like professional football. So the Jake Brownings, the Gardner Minshew's, the Nick Mullins, they just get eliminated out of like the picture because they're just done. They can give you 2 games, but that's it.
Daigle, a guy we didn't talk about, we briefly touched on this game, but I mean, if you play this guy, you're going to get him at 1%.
Yeah, and we saw with Tutu Atwell back in the mix last week, Demarcus Robinson stayed in 3 wide sets with a route on 94% of Matthew Stafford's dropbacks. Not only that, but over these last 6 games since he's entered the fold and played a little more, it's Demarcus Robinson who actually leads the Rams in end zone targets. So if you want to talk about just cheap touchdown equity and getting exposure towards the Rams offense, Demarcus Robinson's right there, honestly.
Yeah, and obviously you're going to save quite a bit of salary with him, and there's going to be cheap salary guys that are pushing that 15%-ish range. So if we could find the cheap 1%ers, like we need 1%ers every week, but this might be a week where with 13 games, you got to be digging for guys like this, especially in big field stuff. Rashee Rice is the top 4-for-4 value on both sites. Top 3 in targets over the past 5 weeks, top 5 in DK fantasy points per game, still priced outside the top 10 wide receivers on both sites. Even though his salary is bumped up a little bit, you should be able to fit him with McCaffrey and Hurts in cash games this week. Daigle, tight end that you like?
Most likely no Zay Flowers. So although I question the environment of the game as a whole, Isaiah Likely, that's the kind of tight end we pay down for, because he's still not priced relative to his ceiling. And clearly he can get there every single week without Mark Andrews, as he's done the last 3 games. So Likely will definitely be in my pool of players.
And likely probably not going to be super popular, even if Zay Flowers is out, because it's likely that Gerald Everett is the chalk tight end, because he is a little bit cheaper. So I'll just let you guys know that Gerald Everett is my cash play. So Kyren, who is your tight end play?
George Kittle. I said a couple weeks ago that the winner of Best Ball Mania would have George Kittle, because weeks ago I was like, man, this looks like a pretty good spot. But yeah, I mean, it's a bet on Purdy. It's a bet on the ownership not going there. I think of, if people outside of McCaffrey are going to go to someone, I kind of doubt it's Kittle, given that he's an expensive tight end. And it's always tough to predict, but just like very, very few players, have a ceiling like this at tight end. And so this is kind of the spot, right? So I think I want to mix in Kittle this week.
We have the one position we didn't mention that we have quite a few cheap options on is DST. So I do think it's kind of like a play what fits your lineup type of week, but do any stand out to you guys, starting with Kyren?
I'll say the Panthers, just so we got, this Lawrence playing through an injury, or, maybe not playing, but, the other thing is, like, the Jaguars have been throwing, so I think you still get pass attempts against, even if he's not fully healthy. And they're cheap. They're very cheap.
Daigle?
The Panthers secondary, though, has been dictating games. That was the whole point of, betting them against the Packers last week, is the fact that no one has gone over 235 yards against them since their bye. They're allowing just 5.9 yards per attempt through the air. So Panthers secondary has been amazing. I like the Panthers defense a lot, but a couple of other defenses I'll be playing are the Raiders and the Bears. So I'll talk about the Raiders. Literally the number 1 defense in fantasy since Antonio Pierce took over, as we talked about earlier, the last 7 games. He correlates with Zamir White as well, since it's the same game script that's needed for White to get there. Do you think they'll be the cash game option, TJ?
There's so many defenses kind of bunched together that are projecting pretty well. I don't think that any defense is going to run away with ownership this week.
Okay, well, if they are, then I will say, at least on DraftKings, Texans are priced at the same thing. And it's just a spot where, even with Levis back, Levis should have been benched, a few of these weeks, because the offense was so bad. The Texans a couple weeks ago just stuffed Derrick Henry for 10 yards on 20 touches, I believe it was. You can also just pivot to the Texans. The Raiders get steamed.
Yeah, I like the Texans.
El Nino year. That's why D. Hember hasn't panned out.
Yeah, I like the Texans quite a bit too, and they fit in cash games. As we get out of here, instead of telling you guys to go rate and review the podcast, for any of you that have been on Twitter the last few days, you might have seen messages from John Daigle and from our producer Sal. This is their last weekend with 4for4. So Daigle, Sal, just wanted to salute you guys, say thank you for everything that you guys have done. I know the subscribers have appreciated you guys a ton, and I know we're going to continue to cross paths. So if you're going to follow anybody this week, make it John Daigle, make it Sal. Check out everything they have done and everything they got coming in the near future. So appreciate you guys. Salute to you guys. Happy New Year.
I will quite literally be saving it for the Discord, because I'll still be in there. You won't hear my voice anymore, at least on this show, but I'll still be in the Discord.
Appreciate you guys. Good luck at everything in the future. 4for4 and their subs. Appreciate both of you.
Absolutely.
Kyren, anything before we get out of here?
No, I'd just like to echo that. It's been a pleasure working with Daigle and Sal here. So I just bummed to hear that news, but excited to see what you guys got going in the future. Yeah, that's it for me.
Happy New Year to all the listeners. And yeah, as Daigle mentioned, still be back on Sunday morning. So we will catch you guys in the Discord. Happy week 17.